One of the firmest rules on the initial run of Batman the Animated Series was that there were to be no supernatural characters. There were a handful of rejected scripts in those early days that featured Batman encountering ghosts and other spooky characters, such as the Sandman. However, by the time of the new Batman adventures, the rules were far more relaxed. By this point, the shared universe of Batman and Superman had expanded to include all sorts of unusual threats, like aliens and interdimensional demons. In my opinion, one of the key things about the new Batman adventures was that it was a place for experimentation, referencing all eras of Batman. There were comedy episodes that were like the 1950s era of Batman comics, like Joker's Millions and Critters. Deeply tragic episodes like Growing Pains and Mad Love that were part of the more modern era of Batman. And then you had episodes like The Demon Within, which felt very much like the 1970s era of Batman comics, when the Caped Crusader started dipping his toes into more supernatural territory, thanks to the relaxing of the rules of the Comic Book Code Authority. For the uninitiated, the Comic Book Code Authority was a regulating body for the comic book industry that was set up in response to the scaremongering around comic books in the 1950s. Worried parents could feel safe in the knowledge that any comic book with the code stamp on the cover would contain no content that was inappropriate for children, hence why so many comics of the 50s and 60s are a bit naff. However, in the 1970s, rules around horror were loosened, which saw an influx of horror comic books. One such comic was The Demon, featuring Etrigan the Demon, created by the legendary Jack Kirby. Etrigan features prominently in The Demon Within, alongside one of his villains, Klarion the Witchboy. And what with it being spooky season at time of uploading, it seems like the perfect time to talk about a supernatural character like Klarion. Klarion first appeared in The Demon No. 7 in 1973, and at first he appeared to be an ally of Jason Blood and Etrigan. The issue opens with Etrigan fighting what looks like an American pilgrim, and in the process gets poisoned. Klarion suddenly appears alongside his cat Teakle, utters the words that will turn Etrigan back into Jason Blood, and takes him home. Now, before getting into Klarion, I just want to quickly talk about his cat Teakle. As a cat man myself, I can say that not every cat likes to be picked up, never mind picked up and walked around in public. However, Teakle is very submissive, sitting in Clarion's arms as he strolls around stroking him. While this evokes images of sinister characters like James Bond's Blofeld, to me it immediately highlights to us that these two characters have a connection. Teakle clearly trusts Klarion, or is submissive, which is fairly unusual for a cat. Although Teakle is no mere cat, he's actually a magical being. Despite this being the first time that they've met, Klarion refers to Jason as his uncle. They aren't related, just to be clear. And Teakle cures Jason of his life-threatening injuries. As well as curing Jason of his malady, Teakle can sense the presence of evil creatures and transforms into a more savage tiger. Once Jason's back on his feet, Klarion introduces himself properly, saying he has come a long way to seek protection. He is a refugee from another dimension, the Beyond Country, and he is being pursued by his people because he had dabbled in magic that would allow him to control his elders, which is a cardinal sin. Along the way, he uses his powers to restock Jason's fridge and helps himself to the food, which is a useful cost-saving ability. Clarion's real power is the ability to control people. When Jason attends a party where a magic skeptic mocks him, Klarion possesses the partygoer and forces him to pour an entire punch bowl over his head. Similarly, he forces Jason to turn into Etrigan and compels him to return, as his people have found him and for some reason stripped him to the waist and tied him upside down. Etrigan uses a hex to banish Clarion's people to the Beyond Country again, saving Klarion, who responds to this act of heroism by tightening his grip on Etrigan. Klarion plans to stay with Jason and Etrigan, believing that he has the ability to control them, but he has yet to properly develop that skill. Instead, Etrigan sends Klarion and Teakle to a safe and distant place to get them out of his hair. Klarion appeared a handful of other times over the next 20 years, but none of the stories were that major. It is worth noting that in the early 2000s, Klarion appeared as part of Grant Morrison's Seven Soldiers of Victory, which is arguably one of his most significant storylines, but that took place after his appearance in the new Batman adventures, so I'm not really going to talk about that. I will say, though, that if you are a fan of Klarion, definitely read that book. Now, I have to admit, I really don't like Klarion at all. It's not that he's a bad character, it's just everything about him annoys me to my very core. Which was a very deliberate choice on the creative team's part. Every time I see his ridiculous haircut, I want to report his barber to the authorities for allowing him to go out into the world looking like that. In terms of his character, he comes across as an obnoxious, petulant brat, which, in a way, makes him a perfect Batman villain. He is a petulant child that possesses great power, but only uses it for petty reasons. He would actually be dangerous if he had malicious intentions beyond satisfying his own urges. Klarion made his first and only DCAU appearance in the episode The Demon Within. Their version of Klarion has a slightly streamlined origin. He's not from another dimension, he's just a weird magic-obsessed kid that allegedly turned his parents into mice. When we first see him, he's at an auction trying to buy a branding iron used by Morgane Le Fay, who hasn't appeared in these shows just yet, but I'll be talking about her more in a future video. Jason Blood is also after the iron. Presumably he knows what power it possesses and wants to add it to his collection of curios, and tries to outbid Klarion. While Klarion has deeper pockets than Jason, he can't compete with Bruce Wayne, who realizes that if Jason Blood is trying to get an ancient item, there's likely a good reason for it. Once he wins the auction, he simply hands the iron over to Jason as a professional courtesy. This earns them both the ire of Klarion, who sends his cat Teakle to steal the iron. Much like her comic book counterpart, yes, Jack Kirby refers to Teakle as both male and female, Teakle is no mere house cat. Instead, she's a powerful beast that manages to get the better of Batman, Robin, and Blood's alter ego, Etrigan, the Demon. The reason Klarion wants this iron is because it would allow him to take control of Etrigan, which is a nice nod to his first appearance. But to take things further, it would allow him to separate Etrigan from Blood. Without Etrigan, Jason Blood begins to age rapidly. He is an ancient being from the times of King Arthur, whose life was extended by being bonded to Etrigan. And I'll be talking more about him in a future video, but just know that even without Etrigan, and with his body failing him, Blood is not without his own defences. Just because Etrigan is under Clarion's control, that doesn't mean that he likes it. Klarion is well aware that Etrigan hates him for placing the spell on him, and whenever possible, Etrigan maliciously complies with his orders. Like when he was asked to open the door and he kicked it down, before bowing sarcastically. And what was Clarion's grand plan? What wickedness could he achieve with an all-powerful demon under his control? He uses Etrigan to take him into an adult-rated movie, which he didn't even enjoy, steals an ice cream truck, which was out of his favourite flavour, and breaks into a cake shop to stuff his face with treats. He's impulsive, unambitious, and with no real plan of what to do. He's so pedestrian in his desires.
Stop that noise! I don't like that building! I want cake!
That it's hard to take him seriously, despite his colossal power. He's more mischievous than anything else. When Batman attempts to intervene, Klarion casts spells on him, although Jason Blood counters them. This makes Blood a target for Klarion. He cannot stand someone getting in his way. Of course, he could have just waited for Jason's body to give out, but he's impatient, and he wants to see Jason suffer. Tim Drake is left with Blood to help him, and gets something of a magical education in this episode. He acts as a substitute for the audience of sorts. Yes, we know what magic is, but we had never seen it in Batman the Animated Series before. The closest we came to it was Ra's al Ghul and his Lazarus bits, as well as Thoth Capera, who seemed to be an immortal zombie mummy thing. But this is genuine sorcery, conjuring things from out of nowhere, curing injuries, and turning limbs to bark, for instance. Tim can scarcely believe what he's seeing. When Etrigan manages to break through Blood's defences, it's Clarion's arrogance and sadism in wanting to see every second of Blood's demise that leads to his defeat. Teakle tries to warn him, but he refuses to listen, and Batman strikes. Klarion may be all-powerful, but he's still just a boy and no match for Batman. And when Batman gets his hands on the branding iron, he simply holds it out of Clarion's reach, and recites a spell to restore Etrigan to Blood. And that's not the only trick he picked up. When Klarion sicks Teakle on him, Batman thwacks her in the face with the branding iron, leaving a mark, and orders her to sit. This acts as a further reminder that Batman is a dog person. Sorry, Selina. Klarion responds by trying to Hadoken Batman out of existence, but his powers are no match for Etrigan's. He is, after all, just a boy. When last we see Klarion, he's sitting in the naughty corner, within an ornament on Blood's shelf, presumably where he remains to this day. Klarion the Witchboy is not a noteworthy villain by any stretch of the imagination. He doesn't have any relatable motivations. He just wants to entertain himself and gorge on cake. Actually, on second thought, maybe that is quite relatable. But when compared to other villains seen in Batman the Animated Series and the new Batman Adventures, his motivations are unremarkable. Having said that, I recognise that he exemplifies the kinds of stories the creative team wanted to tell in the new Batman Adventures. When they came back to Batman after having worked on Superman for several years, some of that Superman DNA came across with them. Klarion is not the kind of villain that is likely to speak to people in the same way that tragic villains like Mr. Freeze, Clayface or Two-Face might. But I'm sure he's a favourite of someone out there. But to me, he's little more than a footnote. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time I'm going to continue my Halloween series of videos by looking at the co-star of The Demon Within, Etrigan the Demon, and his backstory of love, betrayal, and punishment. Hope to see you then.